Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tom Burbage. Tom is a Naval Academy graduate, former Navy test pilot, industry leader, and author. As a Naval Aviator, he accumulated more than 3,000 hours in 38 different types of military aircraft and retired as a U.S. Navy captain in 1994. He also worked at Lockheed Martin as an executive vice president and general manager for both the F-22 Raptor and F-35 programs. He is the co-author of a new book, F-35, The Inside Story of the Lightning II, and I am excited to have him on the show to learn from his leadership experience in the military and in business. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here with you, John.
It's an honor to meet you, sir, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. You have a lot of history with military and industry leadership, and so I'm just excited to talk to you. But I wanted to start off, your story in terms of your Navy career is pretty fascinating with as many aircraft as you trained on. So when did you develop your passion for flying? Was it before you went to the Naval Academy? And then what kind of unique opportunities did you have as a Naval Aviator?
Well, I think I developed my passion for naval aviation before the flying part. My father was a career Naval Aviator. Pretty much all the role models in my young life, my high school life or so, were Naval Aviators. They always seemed to be having a good time, and they always seemed to enjoy flying. So I didn't actually fly till after I graduated from the academy and went into flight training in Pensacola. But I did had my first squadron tour flying E-2s, which is a crewed airplane of 5 people in the airplane. So it teaches you, again, a lot about leadership lessons on how to operate as a crew. And you're responsible as the pilot for the other 4 lives in the airplane. So it's a responsibility factor to that also. And then I had the great fortune of going to the Naval Test Pilot School at Patuxent River. And that's where I flew a lot of the different airplanes. We got to fly some of the Air Force airplanes. A good bit of the number in the 38 are 1 or 2 or 3 flights in a type of airplane. We flew sailplanes, helicopters. So you get to fly a wide variety. And then when I left active duty, went to work for Lockheed Martin, I flew A-7s in the reserves, which allowed me to stay current in a jet. And so when I got to F-35, I tried to fly with all the different air forces in the countries that were part of the F-35 program, which was a very unique opportunity and something most people wouldn't get to do. But because I had the currency in the A-7 at the time, I was able to do that. So that's where all the variety came from. Probably one of the most challenging ones is I was on the aircraft carrier USS Eisenhower, a nuclear carrier, and flew the ship's airplane. At that time, every carrier had one airplane that they owned to fly passengers back and forth. Got to fly with some pretty high-level people, the Prime Minister of Israel and others, bring them out to the ship for a day at sea. So again, you get the responsibility factor of saying, you got other lives in the airplane with you, and you want to make sure that everything stays safe the whole time. So that's kind of a short summary of my variety of airplanes on naval aviation.
Does it surprise you that the Eisenhower is still out there today? It's actually deployed right now outside the Red Sea.
It's having flying. I was actually the V2 division officer, the catapult and the resting gear officer. So I was on the flight deck the whole time on its maiden cruise.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. Well, I've been out in the Navy 30 years this year, and I was on the USS Tennessee, and she's still making deployments. It's crazy to think that the long life of some of the naval assets is pretty amazing.
It really is.
Yeah. So what were some of the life lessons you learned from your time in the service?
Well, I think, it's on different levels. When I was in a squadron, you have an assignment. I was a maintenance officer for a while, and the airplanes the other people are flying are sort of dependent on you doing your job right. So you have a sense of developing a high-performance team. Probably the most aggressive place where that occurred was on the flight deck of the Eisenhower, where I had about 140 sailors that were average age was probably about 20, and we're handling these high-performance airplanes, moving around the flight deck, noisy, dangerous kind of a place. So you really get into building a high-performance team, building trust and confidence with the people that work for you, as well as the chain of command upward, which may be the big difference between corporate world and the military world is the way the chain of command works is much more rigid in the military side. You have to be able to have the confidence of your seniors, but also have to have your team below you that's willing to fly and fight with you. So it's a little bit different there. certainly in terms of the risk if you're in a front deployed situation or even beyond that, a combat situation, it's even more critical. So a lot of the same skills apply, but they may be at a slightly different level. But it's all about building teams. It's all about people that want to work for you, people that will go to great lengths to do the job right. And that takes a lot of effort to build that team, both up and down.
Did you have any particular people that leaders maybe that you looked up to, or that helped you develop your leadership skills, or just anyone in particular that stood out to you?
I tried to learn from every situation that I was in. I had some really good commanding officers that I thought carried themselves as real leaders. I had others that weren't quite so good. They either lost their temper on occasion, or had some sort of, I would say, a minor deficiency in their leadership qualities. So I always tried to copy the ones that seemed to be able to build the strongest team, seemed to be able to have the respect and even in some cases the love of the guys that work for them, and willing to perform extraordinary things. I think that the mark of a leader, of a true leader, is the ability to take ordinary people and make them do extraordinary things. So again, try to pick the best qualities and mimic those to the extent that you can. Everybody's human. Everybody has their own frailties, but I also feel very strongly that communication, every sailor has a story. You need to learn their stories. And sailors is a quote unquote word that means anybody that works for you, whether you're a civilian or military. And that's the way you get the best performance out of people.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that was the magic that I learned in the military. When I came in, I ran 8 different manufacturing plants throughout my career. And we got to know our teams of course, submarine small, and we stood these long watches, in tight, cramped quarters. So we really got to know our sailors. They really got to know me. And I think that was what allowed us to build trust, build rapport, get difficult things done. We shared so much, it was a shared responsibility, shared accountability, shared vulnerability. If we screwed up, we were dead, type of thing. And I found that kind of building that rapport with the people working for me, I found that worked really well in the Navy, and I took that right to the business world. I just wondered if that was a similar experience with you, whereas you really got to know your team when you're in the Navy, and whether that was similar with your experience in the corporate world.
Very much so, and it occurred on different scales. And it also depended on which part of the company you were in. There are parts of the company which I wasn't in, like finance and things like that, where a lot of it's desk work and which 9-to-5 work. And then there's the other side of program management and business development, those kind of things where you're I think they're more like the military, because you're more interactive with people. It's more important to build strong, trusting relationships. I did a little research on your books before I came on, and I think you captured the lessons of the military really well in the 3 that I looked at.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think carrying those forward it's all about teams and building teams, and the environment you're building a team in might be slightly different when you're deployed on a ship than it is when you're in an office building, but it's the same principles of building a strong team.
So, when you left the Navy and you went into the corporate world, I mean, you're obviously in senior leadership positions there. Did you find yourself, kind of going back to lessons you learned in the Navy as far as experience? You say, well, this worked in military situation. Let me use it here. Did you find yourself going back to some of those lessons when you were leading teams in the corporate world?
I think probably not consciously. I mean, I didn't think back on a specific event that happened when I was in a squadron, but I think it becomes part of your DNA. It becomes part of the way you think, and then you think like that. So
yeah,
I think it was all important in terms of building the foundation to be successful in some of these larger projects. If you think about the F-35 that's just a small example. There were 3 major prime contractors that were teamed, and none of them liked to consider themselves a subcontractor. And so forming the leadership team, you basically had to, and we use this as an example all the time, take your company badge off and put your JSF T-shirt on. So everybody's on the JSF team. You're not a Northrop guy or a BAE guy or a Lockheed Martin guy. You are a JSF person. And that was kind of counter because we hadn't had a big new program like that in quite some time. They're coming a decade apart now, or even more. So building that grounds up team is always a challenge. But that's what you have to do, and then you have to do the fundamental principles of communicating and understanding and getting feedback, and always trying to make a better performing team than what you are. And those things, I was very blessed to have really good leaders that were part of my group, and I think we learned from each other.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So let's get into that. Let's talk about the F-35 project. You have a book out that's called F-35, The Inside Story of the Lightning II. What are some aspects about the F-35 program that maybe the public may not be aware of? Like, I just learned that there was 3 contractors working together. I didn't even know that. So what are some other things that maybe the public may not be aware of in this project?
Well, the complexity factor is very, I would say, much more complex even than other high technology programs like the F-22 were complicated programs, but they were single service. The F-35 had 3 prime contractors teamed at the top. We were building 3 different versions of the airplane for the 3 services, and the services are not prone to building a common airplane.
Right.
Marines want theirs, and the Navy wants theirs, and so this was kind of going into, it's not that it hadn't been tried in the past, it just hadn't been very successful in the past. So we had that, and then we had the plane was being built for our 3 U.S. services, as well as the original partnership was 8 other countries. So we had 9 nations that were part of it, and the government-to-government agreements allowed those nations to participate industrially in the development, in the design, development, test, and then eventually production of the airplane. So that added another layer of very complex personal relationships on top of it. Every one of those countries has a parliament or a Congress like ours. Every one of them has a Department of Defense like ours. Every one of them has to fight to preserve budgets for the program. So you wind up not only trying to run the day-to-day contracted activities to get these airplanes done and out there and tested, you also had to run, interference through those different bureaucratic processes in 9 nations. Today, that number is 19. So it's even more complicated over time. And a lot of that was due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and some of the European NATO countries that fly and fight with our equipment. Now their equipment needs to be modernized and updated. So it's only gotten a little more complicated over time. But those were the kind of things that we had to think about as we put together the overall program. When you look at the technical side, some other things were happening at the same time. The pilot population was moving into the females and into the lightweight Asian males that were in some of the countries that were now going to buy the F-35. So if you think about what does that mean? Well, that means the ejection seat has to be able to get a small light person out of the airplane, as well as the big guy who's 235 pounds when he's naked, and not leave the big guy in the airplane and make sure the little guy doesn't get hurt, or the little gal. So that created a new technical issue that we hadn't seen in ejection seats in the past before, just by basically expanding that pilot population much lower down in the weight. So things like that. We also had to take 2 of the 3 airplanes to sea, and stealth characteristics up to this point in time had been pretty technically exacting. If you had a damage to a stealthy airplane, you normally had to go into a hangar with temperature and humidity controls to fix it. And as you know, that's not the environment you have on a hangar deck or a flight deck at sea. So probably one of the biggest technical challenges we had was enabling the airplane to think of stealth in a different way, still be extremely hard to find on radar, but be impervious to the saltwater, non-temperature controlled environments of ships. So things like that were technical factors that kind of evolved as we went through the early days of development and test.
Wow. As I have an engineering background, just thinking about just those few items you mentioned, your brain hurts because you're like, wait a second, I got to deal with, all these different types of pilot weights and sizes. I have to deal with, because, as somebody who spent some time at sea, The sea is not forgiving, right? Salt air is terrible for anything. And now you're putting out a very high-tech aircraft in that kind of non-temperature controlled salt spray kind of environment. That's very much a major challenge.
There's one other technology that was not related to the airplane that wound up being somewhat influential on the program, and that was the rise of social media and the internet. For the first time, we could actually connect people through the internet, through classified ways of doing that, to allow others to participate in the design and development of the airplane in one common database. That sounds like a bunch of words, but it's really important to do that. Not say you build the wing, you build the back, you build the front. Everybody's working in the same database at the same time, so we could really develop a highly integrated airplane. But the rise of social media became a factor as critics on the program could now be connected around the world.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
It wasn't necessarily the case in earlier airplanes. We didn't have the amount of international participation that we had on F-35, and everybody's a critic, at least during the development days of the program. So that became quite a factor that we had to understand and deal with as we went.
It's really interesting you say that because, even maybe 15 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, you couldn't find, a group of people around the world that would be, against or for some particular topic. Now today, whatever you might be against or whatever you might be for, you can find someone in the world that has that same belief system as you because of the rise of social media. So if you don't like the F-35 program, for example, you're going to find somebody else out there that has that same core belief as you. And now you can group together before you couldn't, right? There'd be just single people or your small group of people around the world. Now you have this ability to, I never really thought about that. And that's certainly one of the challenges in leadership in the modern era, because you do have this rise of, various stakeholders that can rise up against any particular thing that you're trying to build. And as you say, it's easy to be a critic. It's really hard to be a builder.
Right. That's exactly right. It was just an interesting phenomenon. We did find positives to it as well as negatives to it, and the countries that were part of the program are our closest allies that fly and fight with us as a coalition, and they operate our airplanes today. So we were able to find some really good engineers in the UK and some really good engineers in Australia. And if you think about it, if you go from Fort Worth, Texas to the UK, that's about 7 hours. UK to Australia is about 7 hours. So you could do what we call follow the sun engineering.
Yeah.
And we're all in the same database now. So we could, just work an engineering package around the world without paying overtime. So you can basically get 24 hours of engineering on straight time costs.
Yeah.
So there were ways to exploit it a little bit, but it was just a really interesting phenomenon that was part of the story.
Yeah. And again, technology has enabled this. This is not something that could have been done, 15, 20 years ago. So now this, where you can do engineering around the clock, around the entire clock, using partners from various nations. That's remarkable. And it's also, I think, a challenge in leadership because we haven't had to lead like this before, right? So I was just going to ask you, what were some of the leadership lessons or challenges maybe you had throughout this program? Obviously, very complex. You've got multiple different contractors. You've got up to 19 nations. What are some of the other challenges from a leadership perspective?
Well, I think in the early days, the biggest challenge we had was the contract. People have forgotten this, but the contract was signed about 6 weeks after 9/11.
Mm.
Part of that was not that the F-35 would have a role in what comes beyond 9/11, but it was in strengthening the coalition. There was same countries were going to be involved in trying to fight terror. So the contract was awarded much quicker than we expected. We expected to have a contract around the first of the year. It was awarded the day that they announced it in the Pentagon. So we came back to work on Monday and we were already behind schedule, so to speak.
Jeez.
So we had to do a number of things. We had to hire. We were planning on having about 3 months to bring on the workforce. We had to start hiring that week.
Mm.
We were bringing on new people at about 100 a week.
Wow.
If you've been in an HR department, And that was sustained for a year. We went from about 180 people in end of 2001 to about 4,000 at the end of 2002.
Wow.
That's just in Fort Worth. They're not not as large number, but similar percentage increases in the other places. And trying to bring that volume of people on and make them productive quickly is a huge challenge. We invented something called onboarding, which now is a common term in industry, because we had to be able to teach, it's acronym soup when you first come into a program like this. You had to be able to teach the language. You had brand new, about 50% of the new hires were brand new engineers right out of college to try and keep the engineering rate under control in terms of cost. And we had a phenomenon that we called reverse mentoring, where the old crusty developmental engineers would whip these young engineers in line, but not really have any clue how to use these new computer databases. And the new engineers coming out were very proficient in that. So they were teaching the older guys. So it was really it was a natural team building element to it. You couldn't be too rough on the new guys because they were teaching you along while you were teaching them. So there were challenges like that in the early days, trying to get a productive global team in place. And the numbers that we were dealing with was very much of a challenge in the early days. But it was labeled the largest risk by the Department of Defense, was our ability to staff with the quality engineering staffing that we needed.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think in my career, the most difficult thing I ever did was to grow a business quickly. And people think, well, growth is easy, right? Just hire a bunch of people and get off the ground. I found it to be one of the hardest things to do, especially with maintaining a culture and maintaining, like you mentioned, the acronym soup. Like okay, so this is our company. This is the way we do business. And let's have 4,000 people join the company and understand this is who we are and this is how we do business. They're all coming in with all sorts of different backgrounds, histories, different experience levels. They use different systems, and you're trying to bring them all in and to work under one roof and have one culture. I think it's one of the hardest things to do as a leader.
The thing we did that was also interesting, and the softer skill here is we formed a group of what we call guiding principles. We wanted to create a JSF culture, because not only were we going across 3 different corporate cultures in the U.S., we were going across this international industrial base also. So we had guiding principles, and we had common objectives. And if you walked into a conference room in Brisbane, Australia, or you walked into one in the UK, or you walked into one in El Segundo, California, the exact same posters are in those conference rooms. And we would start our staff meetings for the first year or so reviewing the guiding principles. Are we really living by these? Are we forming the culture the way we want it to form? Even to the extent of giving an annual award. This didn't make me real popular with Lockheed Martin, but we gave an annual Lockheed Martin award to a team that was made up of the 3 contractors all in Fort Worth working on this one project. The team won the award, but normally corporations don't give their internal award to another corporation. So,
yeah, right.
So you can't reward 2 people out of a team of 6 that cooperatively did this. So we had things like that. They were kind of cultural adjustments by the incumbent culture, but we wanted to be important parts of the new emerging JSF culture.
That's fantastic. So when people get the book, I mean, it's really going to be the whole story, right? The book tells the whole story of the F-35 program and the challenges and how you went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in that short amount of time in 2001. So what other things can they find in this book?
Well, you'd be surprised how many people that worked on the program have now read the book and said, I had no idea it was that hard. Because their little world was in one.
Yeah.
But let me tell you just a little bit of background about the book. The book was started by 2 other people, the other 2 authors that are shown on the cover of the book. And they went to Lockheed Martin, they went to the Joint Program Office on the government side, and they went to the other 2 live in Australia. They went to the Australian Department of Defense, and they requested permission to interview people. That's all they wanted was access. Nobody's helping fund anything. It's all just access. And they started doing these interviews. I had recently retired. And I got a call saying, hey, these guys are writing this book. They want to come interview you in Atlanta. So they came to Atlanta, spent a whole day with them, and it became obvious quickly obvious to me that they didn't understand the whole story of the program.
Mm.
They had come in about the 10-year point. They were part of the evaluation team that was trying to make sure we were on track to actually deliver an airplane. So they didn't have the whole build-up story. I said, there's a lot of books about program management taking lessons from the F-35, but there aren't any that tell the real human journey of how the program was put together. So they said, well, why don't you come help us there? So I said, well, I've always kind of thought about doing something like that. And so we redid the table of contents, and it's really about how the program was won initially, how we put together the teams, how we built the culture. And there's a deep dive into a couple of the international countries. The UK is one, Australia is another one, where we go down into what was the challenge they were facing.
Mm.
How did they were really important parts of the program. So it tells that whole story. There's some technical parts, the ejection pieces described in there and things like that get into some of the, you don't have to be an engineer to read the book. In fact, we had a ghostwriter that was helping us, and his wife is a romance novelist. He's a technical guy. You may have heard of his name is David Poyer. He's written a number
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
books. And all the chapters had to go through Lenore, his wife, so she could say, I don't know what you guys are talking about. This is too complicated. And we would make them less complicated, more readable for the general public. So it's really the human story of the F-35, and it goes into a lot of the challenges and how we overcame those. So
I love that. I absolutely love that you focus on the human side, the human journey, because I think when we see or hear about the F-35, you get caught up in the technology. You get caught up in the this amazing piece of technology, right? But it's people at the end of the day. It's people that created this technology, and it's people who led people to create this technology. And to me, that's the story that's more interesting than the technology itself. Even as an engineer, I'm fascinated by how do you get all these people around the world to accomplish this really difficult thing, and that's the fascinating story to me.
Yeah, and we did a little over 100 interviews. And we did all the leaders that were on the government side. We did somewhere between 4 and 6 in each of the individual countries. So there, and I like to say it's their book. It's not my book. The book is. It took us 4 years to do it, and a lot of that time was digesting these interviews and trying to pick the salient points out of them. And everywhere we used an interview in the book, we didn't use it as a direct quote. We used it. Some cases we did, but usually it was just, this is what this person experienced and did. We would send that back to the person that we interviewed and have them read it first to make sure that they were happy with it, because we don't want people unhappy with the way we wrote the book. So it's told as really how does all this come together? How does the airplane sort of emerge out of this massive global challenge, and then how did the airplane do in its testing? And if there's one complaint, the real diehard engineering technical guys wanted to know more about the classified stuff.
Right, of course, they all want to know that, right? Yeah,
the book is not classified. So
yeah, no, I like that, and I think again, for the listeners of this show in particular, they're going to want to know that human story, because that's really the fascinating part. How do you get people to do, group of people, diverse group of people, to do nearly an impossible task? And I think that's the story that's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun writing it. There was a lot of work, but it was fun writing it. And it was fun for me to go back 10 years. I'm retired 10 years now, to go back and re-talk to the people that I worked with, putting this together, 15, 20 years ago when we started. They all were, I thought it would be harder to do than it was. They were all anxious to participate.
Yeah. I love that, because I think everybody wants to hear, they want to tell their story. They want to share their experiences. And I think it's great when it comes along, like I said, you and your co-authors could put these stories together, because that's something that everyone who is part of that program can buy that book and give it to their family. So this is what I did over that period of time. Why I wasn't home on weekends, or why I was, staying late in the office. This is why, and I know when I wrote my second book, my parents read it, and they said, we had no idea you did those things. I didn't really talk about it. I just did it, So it's interesting. I love that.
Feedback. What I thought was humorous when I said the book I gave a free book to everybody that interviewed, and we interviewed a number of the test pilots, and their life is in the cockpit of the airplane, and they're called it the best seat in the house. They're having the fun flying the airplane. The feedback was almost uniform from each of them, saying, I had no idea how hard it was to put that international partnership together, and the extent you guys had to go to the non-flying stuff, and how do you build a team and stuff like that. So it was good feedback. I mean, I enjoyed having them tell me that because, they had their job to do, but they were, a little bit of a cocoon relative to the politics that were going on everywhere.
That's fantastic. And we're gonna talk about links to how to get to that book here in a little bit. Before we wrap up, I was going to ask you one question. I know you're friends with Fred Stuvik, who's a friend of the show. He's been on twice. We love Fred here at Deep Leadership. But you guys are working on some things with respect to leadership and what's happening at the service academies. Maybe share a little bit about what you guys are working on in terms of trying to get the right type of leaders coming out of the military academies these days.
Well, we started working together about 3 or 4 years ago. Fred and I go way back 50 years to when he was a young student at the prep school, and I was one of the assistant football coaches that had just graduated from the Naval Academy. And Fred was quite an athlete, as I know you know, and he's a very good leader and a very good human being. And we reunited in this effort to I don't know what the right word is. We don't want to come across as critics. I'm on the board of trustees for the Academy, so I'm an internal guy also. But we were very concerned about what we saw was a loss of focus on the development of real leaders, particularly leaders that are going to go into, forward deployed positions or even into combat. The curriculum, the admissions criteria had all changed dramatically from what we recalled. Now, we would have been fat, dumb, and happy, not even concerned about it, other than we got involved with a case that was going on that just seemed very unfair. It was during the summer of the riots, and lots was going on in the country, and it soon became obvious that while we were focused on the service academies, and there's a similar group focused on the Air Force Academy and West Point, that the problem was bigger than that. It's a policy issue, it's an ideology issue, sort of taking place around the country. A lot of us wrote opinion pieces and op-eds, and a lot of them have been published, and we're sort of compiling them into a book that's going to come out in about a month that's related to our perspectives on what's happened in the loss of leadership. And you can look at the number of commanding officers that have been relieved in the last couple of years.
It's been a lot, yeah.
You can look at any criteria you want to look at, and it's clear there's been some erosion in the high-quality leadership development aspects of the service academies, in our opinion. Mm-hmm. So we've met with the superintendent. We've raised our issues. We're still working our way through that. But there's a lot going on in our country right now for anybody that cares to look under the covers. And what our concern is really not going to affect our lives. It's going to affect our kids and our grandkids. Maybe not even our kids as much as our grandkids. And so we're trying to raise a concern about the world that's going to be left behind. So that's been our focus.
And I appreciate you doing that. I have a son who's in the Navy, and he just came back he was on one of the destroyers in the Red Sea getting shot at by the Houthis. And he just returned, and I can tell you this, he has an amazing commanding officer. And she just had a change of command, and he has a new commanding officer, and he seems to be of the same cloth. So the good news is there are still great leaders out there. But we have to be very concerned that the service academies are creating, that next generation of leaders that have the right principles and know how to lead people. Like you said, it's been far too many commanding officers been relieved. I'm shocked every time. Almost seems like every week there's a new commanding officer being relieved. So very important issue. I'm glad you guys are working on it. And once the book is done, we'll have to have you come back on the show. And maybe with Fred, maybe the two of you, we can do it again and talk a little bit about what you guys worked on. So that's a really important issue.
That'd be great. We'd love to do it.
Yeah. Well, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
I think it's fundamental. Sometimes you can be overcome by complexity of a situation and how is this ever going to come together. And then it breaks down to really the fundamental leadership lessons that we learned way back when. How how do you make sure that the welfare of the people that are working for you comes ahead of your own in many cases? And how do you build the trust and how do you build that leadership factor? And how do you mentor those coming along that are going to take your place and that you need to have at various levels throughout the organization? It's everything we've talked about. I think it's the fundamentals of leading teams. It's the fundamentals of guiding principles. It's the fundamentals of, helping people perform what seems to them maybe at certain points in time as impossible tasks. So that's what I look back on, and I think we did a reasonably good job across all the people that were working on the project to try to understand that this is going to take a different kind of. It's not project management. We're not looking at data and trying to make minor corrections on what the data is telling you. You're trying to lead people to an end objective.
Yeah. That's such an important point. It's the human journey. It's the human story. It's people. Yeah. It comes right down to it. All that technology is wonderful, but at the end of the day, it's about leading people. And I love that you broke it down that way. So how can our listeners find out more about you and this new book?
The book is on Amazon, but we've also got our website that the three authors have, because we have a number of books that are part of the deal in getting your book published. And that's a better place to go. It's better for the authors, and it's also better because it's a discount over what Amazon's selling the book for. And we have autographed copies of the book and all those kind of things that people are interested. But it's called F-35InsideStory.com. And that should take you there. It pretty much pops up as soon as you type it in. That's the best option to get the book. I think people will enjoy reading it. I think, like I say, you don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to read that. There's a good bit of the technical journeys in there, but it's try to write it in terms that people can read and understand. And it's a very interesting story. I don't know whether it'll ever be repeated at the scale that this program was, because things are happening so fast now. We're into the new world of AI and the new world of all these different technologies. And what's the next set of systems going to look like? Those are all open questions right now. But this was a venture, and like I said, the human journey, I think, is the real story of the book.
Absolutely. That is so good. So we're going to put links in the show notes for these resources. And again, go to the website that we have in the link so that you can make sure you get the right copy of the book and you get it signed there as well. And again, the book is called F-35, The Inside Story of the Lightning II. And again, this is the human journey. This is the story of how the leadership led a large group of people from all over the world to develop a very difficult and amazing piece of technology. But it was just the human story. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in the idea of developing technology like this, go ahead and get this book, because it's going to really help you understand how to lead such a big project like this. Tom, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You've given us a lot to think about. You've shared a lot of great information. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate being here. It's great talking to you, John. I look forward to staying in touch.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.